Alright, I am back with another video, and today we've got a bit of a simple one, but one that I think you guys will enjoy regardless. I really liked the idea of creating some sort of undead warrior. Someone who is just very, very hard to kill and kind of has a necromantic theme to them. I've done stuff like this before using, like Oathbreaker Paladin and such like that. There was something about making this with Barbarian that really enticed me. And it wasn't until I actually got into making the build that I found some interesting synergies which some of you may not expect. Now, the build itself isn't exactly complex. You're going to figure out what we're going for pretty goddamn quickly, but it's basically just we don't die because we ourselves are already kind of undead, and as such we're going to be dealing with a lot of necrotic damage as well as just having a massive HP pool and being able to get back up from being knocked down basically all the time. So I really hope you guys enjoy this one, because while it does seem like quite a simple concept, there are going to be some little bits here and there, but I think you guys are actually going to be quite surprised by it. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. We're going to be kicking things off as a Barbarian today. This is just because it gets us the biggest amount of HP to start, as well as all of the weapon and armor proficiencies we'll need. Again, this build is primarily Barbarian, so starting as one isn't really going to affect us too much. Now, we are going to be playing a Half-Orc today for a few obvious reasons, mainly it being that we get Relentless Endurance. If we reach 0 hit points, we regain a hit point instead of being downed. Basically, this just protects us from death at least once, or going down, I guess. Which, it's going to be one of many that we're going to be stacking on top of each other in order to make it so that we just keep getting up over and over and over again. As I said, we're starting as a Barbarian. This is going to grant us Rage. We all know what Rage does. We enter an enhanced state, get some damage resistance, advantage on strength checks and saving throws, and deal a bit of extra damage with our weapons. And our unarmored defense, which allows us to add our Constitution modifier to our armor class while we're not wearing any armor, which, again, we will be taking advantage of in this build to start, but then we might change it up a bit later. It kind of depends on what you want to make. I'm not too concerned about the AC in this build, because we kind of want to get hit. You'll see what I mean a bit later. For the background, take whatever you like. I just took Soldier because I just thought, yep, someone who died on the battlefield was resurrected as an undead immortal warrior. Makes sense. Athletics and intimidation work amazing on Barbarian. Again, if you've never played a Barbarian who has a bit of charisma and can do the intimidation checks, you're missing out. They're some of the funniest in the game. Now, for our stats, we have a 16 in strength, as it is going to be our primary attacking modifier. Dexterity at 14, so we have a bit of initiative in AC. Constitution is at 16, so that we have that decent health pool. Intelligence and Wisdom are both at 8. We don't really need them, although I don't like Wisdom being that low. Again, those saving throws are pretty nasty, but I make concessions for now, because honestly, the roleplay, it kind of fits. And then finally, a 12 in Charisma, because we are a very intimidating character. Speaking of, let's have a look at our skill proficiencies. Again, Athletics and Intimidation from our background, perfect for this build, followed up by Perception and Survival, or really just any of the other skills you want to take. They're not really going to be very relevant in this build. And that's level 1. At level 2, we're going to take a quick multi-class dip into Sorcerer, of all things. Again, you can probably see where this is going. We're going to get a few things from our dip into Sorcerer, namely our subclass, which of course is going to be Shadow Magic. Not only is this going to give us superior dark vision as well, but it is also mainly going to give us Strength of the Grave. If you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 instead of becoming downed. So now we have 2 revives. And I have tested, they don't overlap, they don't both trigger at the same time, they work one after the other, which is great. So, already at total level 2, we get back up from being knocked down twice. That is very, very good. We're also going to grab some cantrips from this level, and I'll be honest, we're not really going to be using these because obviously you can't really cast while raging, but if you want to have a powerful opening turn before you rage, Booming Blade is obviously going to be a nice option for you, just to get a bit of extra damage on that first hit of combat, especially if you open before initiative starts. For our necromantic theme, let's grab Bone Chill just as a range damage cantrip. You never know when it might come up. Friends is going to be another thing that we can do to give us advantage on those intimidation checks, which we will sorely love. And then for your last one, it doesn't really matter what you take. We kind of have everything that I would ever really want on this build, but you can grab Mage Hand because it is a fun utility cantrip. Now we get to think about spells, and honestly, Shield can be pretty good. In certain situations, maybe you aren't going first in initiative and you want to get a little bit of an AC bump before you're able to rage. This can help. And then for your next one, it doesn't really matter. You can grab False Life. It's only going to give you like 7 temporary HP, which is going to fall off pretty quickly, even with Barbarian Rage, technically doubling it for against regular attacks. But hey, it's a necromancy spell that fits the build, might as well. But we're not here for our spells and cantrips, we're here for that Strength of the Grave feature. Going straight back over to Barbarian, we're going to grab Danger Sense, giving advantage on dexterity saving throws against traps, spells, and surfaces, which is amazing. That means we're going to be taking half damage from things like Fireball pretty consistently. As well as Reckless Attack, allowing us to gain advantage on attack rolls, but giving enemies advantage to hit us. Well, getting advantage on attack rolls is amazing. We're not going to be doing like Great Weapon Master stuff here, but you could do if you wanted to. As well as, we do actually kind of want to get hit on this build, like I said, so that disadvantage isn't really a disadvantage for us. At Barbarian level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and obviously you have a few options. Basically any of these kind of would work, except I might stay away from Wild Magic. Wild Heart for more resistances if you would like, or maybe some of the other benefits it can provide. Giant, just because it is kind of the best one, maybe? I don't know, that's debatable, but it's definitely my favourite. However, today we're going to be going for Berserker. I mean, in my opinion, Undead Barbarian Warrior raised to cause havoc definitely screams Berserker to me, and it's going to give us a few things, namely a bonus action attack. Unfortunately, each time we use it, we'll gain Frenzied Strain, which means that our chance to hit will go down, but I never really found that to be too much of an issue. We also gain the Enraged Throw, allowing us to pick up objects and enemies, and throwing them around, you know, can potentially knock enemies prone. Our strength affects how much we can do, and etc, etc. It is pretty cool. So honestly, I think it's quite a fun ability, but we're not really going to be focusing on it like most throwing Barbarian builds do. We're mainly here for just that extra bit of an attack, but also actually Frenzy Barbarian's later features, which we'll talk about when we get there. At Barbarian level 4, we're going to gain access to our first feat of the build, and honestly, I think we just need to bump up our strength here, nothing too crazy. At Barbarian level 5, you're going to gain access to extra attack, which is great for us. We're getting it a level late because of the multiclass dip, but still, I'm just happy it's here. And also fast movement. That extra bit of movement speed is also really nice to have. At Barbarian level 6, we're going to gain access to one of our subclass features, which is Mindless Rage. While frenzied, you cannot be charmed or frightened, and calm emotions can no longer end your reign. Honestly, kinda niche. Not the best feature in the world, but honestly being able to be immune to charmed or frightened is really, really good with our low wisdom, as usually that wisdom saving throws are where those are gonna come from. So just being able to be this, again, mindless sort of zombie fighter definitely feels right, in my opinion. At Barbarian level 7, we're going to get Feral Instinct, giving us a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, and we cannot be surprised, which is just great for us. This means we're going to be able to go a little bit earlier in initiative, which means we can rage sooner. At Barbarian level 8, we're going to grab another feat, and at this point, while you could max out your strength, I actually do think it's better to bump up our constitution to an 18. This means our stats aren't going to be capped, but I feel like the overall survivability of having 100 HP is pretty good. At Barbarian level 9, we're going to gain access to Brutal Critical. When you land a critical hit, you roll an extra damage die as well as the normal additional critical dice. This actually stacks with our Half-Orc feature that does a very similar thing. So again, Half-Orcs and Barbarians kind of go hand in hand, and this is why. They're very, very powerful, especially if you land a crit. You might see in the combat footage we got a pretty hilarious crit on I think it was a attack from, oh god, Fire Shield, which is very, very funny to me. So it can be pretty powerful. At level 10 of Barbarian, we're going to get our Intimidating Presence feature. This is pretty cool. You get to menace an enemy with a terrible fear, by instilling a terrible fear within them, I should say. You can also maintain this effect by using an action on each of your turns. Now you may be thinking, why on earth would I want to use an action to give someone fear every turn? Well, here's the thing. We still have our bonus action attack from Frenzied Barbarian, so you can still make at least an attack in a turn if you decide to keep this up. However, come on. You are going up against this undead immortal warrior. You're gonna be a bit frightened. And it's actually going to synergize with a spell that we're getting later. Yes, a spell. You heard me right. Trust me, this will make sense in a minute. The equipment is definitely what makes this build. You'll see. Now, at level 11, we're going to gain access to Relentless Rage. Once per short rest, if you drop to 0 hit points while enraged, you regain 1 hit point instead of being downed. This is our third revive. We now have 3. Now, of course, this happens at the max level of the build, but I definitely feel like even though we're getting this quite late, it definitely fits the build to get it anyway. And you may be thinking, this is barely a build, it's just 11 levels of Barbarian with a 1 level dip in Sorcerer. And yes, you're right, but again, it's going to be the equipment and the strategies in play that inform what makes this build unique. So, let's start to talk about those now. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to get out of this is a Barbarian. You're a Barbarian, that just doesn't go down. Even now, we haven't even talked about the equipment yet. But by the time you're max level with this build, you've got 3 full revives, where you just get to get back up and keep on swinging, allowing your allies to heal you, or just being able to get a few more hits before you go down again. But this build is going to have some survivability, and is actually going to punish enemies for attacking us, which we will see in a moment. But overall, I mean, again, it's not really a hard build to follow. I understand that, and honestly, it's probably a bit uninteresting for a build video. But again, trust me, we're about to get into the equipment, and I won't dilly or dally. Let's just start talking about it. This is where a lot of the necromantic aspects are about to come into play. First off, our choice of weapon, Leviathar's Scourge. This allows you to deal an additional 1d6 necrotic damage to all nearby targets when you make an attack with the weapon. That includes yourself. However, as a trade-off for that, you're going to gain resistance to necrotic damage, so the most damage we can ever take from this ability is 3. This is great because this is one of the very few ways in the game to gain resistance to necrotic damage, especially as a barbarian, as the only other way to do it is through a piece of heavy armor. So being able to gain resistance to necrotic damage just obviously feels right for the build, and the fact that we are basically spreading necrosis with every attack that we deal just feels so right for a build like this. Now, I will concede, this isn't even a +1 weapon. That extra 1d6 in necrotic damage is nice, but it is a bit of a weaker base weapon, so you might want to swap this out later, or at the very least get the Drake Throat Glaive to give this thing just a little bit of a bump. Personally, I would throw on a bit of cold damage. I'll explain why right now, because we are also pairing this with a shield, the Absolute Protector. Not only does this give us a bit of extra armor class, namely ending out at a 17, which again isn't the highest, but again, we're trying to get hit with this build, we're trying to encourage the enemies to attack us, so having a middling AC is definitely actually a bit on our benefit. It's a bit for our benefit. So, while the wielder bears the Absolute's brand, which you will want to get in this build, all damage received from spells is reduced by 1, so you'll be a little bit tankier against spells, which is nice, especially with our Danger Sense feature. And then, also, we're going to gain access to Fire Shield Chill. Fire Shield Chill once per long rest, which is really, really good. If we have a tough combat encounter coming up and we know we're going to be taking a lot of hits, we can cast this ahead of time, meaning that we'll gain resistance to cold damage as well as being able to retaliate with 2 to 16 cold damage against every attack that hits us, which is extremely fun when enemies are going to be attacking you all the time. Like I said, I got hit so many times that I actually got a critical hit on the retaliatory damage somehow, which was really, really funny. That must be a bug of some kind, but it just did so much damage. It was hilarious. So yeah, but also I really like the idea of kind of that, again, that idea of having this like necromantic aura, like the spread of necrosis also comes with like the cold chill of death. So I think it's quite fun. I don't think this is 100% necessary for the build, but I think if you're going to go down the kind of absolute route anyway, which you might do with this build, I definitely think Fire Shield Chill from Absolute's Protector is 100% worth it. Now, moving on to the rest of the equipment. We have got the Circle of Bones. Allied undead within 6 meters of game basically gain your Barbarian resistance. Resistance to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage. You also gain the ability to animate dead at level 3, allowing to summon a servant from a corpse. This can be a skeleton or a ghoul. The ghoul being more melee focused, the skeleton having a bow being more ranged focused. Out of the two, I'd recommend the skeleton. It's the one I used in my testing, and the bow deals an additional 1d10 necrotic damage. Because it's a ranged character, it might not always be benefiting from the resistances that it would gain from being near you, but having an extra sniper character and raising a small little undead militia to follow you is very, very fun, so I personally recommend it. And again, the theming of you passing on your Barbarian's Rage to undead allies is kind of fun. Pairing this with an Oathbreaker would be absolutely hilarious. Anyways, moving on to my armor of choice for this build, we have the Dark Justicia Mail. While obscured by shadow, the wearer will deal an additional 1d4 necrotic damage to attackers that hit them with their melee attack. So, by standing in a slightly dim area, anybody who attacks us not only will be taking that damage from Fire, Shield, Chill, but also a bit of necrotic damage just for attacking us. Again, spreading necrosis. It's a piece of medium armor, which means that we're only going to be getting a base of 15 AC from it, but still, I think it's pretty good. I feel like it fits the theme, and it's pretty easy to get your hands on one straight away in Act 1 by going to the Underdark. However, if you feel like that 1d4 necrotic damage isn't really doing a lot for you in the long run, just feel free to instead pick up the Enraging Heart Garb, which again is pretty standard for Barbarians. The Wrath feature still doesn't work, but that plus 2 to your Constitution is absolutely worth it, because you'd be able to max out your con that way, or decide to keep your con at 16, let this bump it up to 18, and then pop your Strength up to 20, or grab another feat of your choice. We'll give you a little bit more build freedom, but I like the Dark Justiciar Mail more, just because the spreading of necrotic damage feels just a little bit more on theme to me. Speaking of, we also have the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets, giving you an extra 1d4 necrotic damage on all of your weapon attacks, which is why this thing is dealing 1d4 plus 1d6, which means it's actually dealing a pretty hefty chunk of damage, despite being a base game weapon. Now, there weren't really any boots for this build that I would actually recommend, so just pick up the Linebreaker boots. If you ever feel like you need to gain some distance in a combat encounter, you're going to be able to dash and then gain Wrath for 2 turns, which will allow you to gain a +1 bonus to damage from melee weapons with each roll for each stack of the condition remaining. Now it says 2, but actually it gives you 3 every time you dash. So if you want to just dash and then use your bonus action attack for a few turns to really build up the power, you can get upwards of +7 on your damage rolls, which obviously makes up for the slightly weaker mace, plus all of the other buffs that we have. You're going to be dealing incredibly significant amounts of damage. Moving on to our accessories. First up, we've got the Periaptive Wound Closure. In the off chance that we somehow burn through all of our revives, you'll automatically stabilize while being downed, meaning that yes, unless an enemy comes and like literally beats your corpse to a pulp, you're going to get back up pretty much no matter what. Also, whenever you are healed, you'll restore the maximum number of hit points. So that means that if we are taking a lot of hits and do end up going down a few times and end up at 1 HP, our allies can bring us back up to massive amounts of health extremely easily. So in my opinion, it's definitely worth grabbing this. Now, we have the Crypt Lord Ring. This is going to allow us to create an Undead, which is a level 6 spell to summon a heinous mummy to fight at our side. Now, this mummy is actually pretty tanky when combined with Circle of Bones. It comes with about 60 or so HP, but of course that is effectively doubled if it's near you against most attacks, meaning it's going to last on the battlefield for a long goddamn time. It also has the ability to frighten enemies, which kind of synergizes with the theme of the build, as well as it has a really powerful unique attack, but only works on frightened enemies. However, this summon does not need to be the one that causes the frightened condition for this attack to work. You can use your intimidating presence to also trigger this feature, meaning that yes, there is actual synergy between you and your summons with this build as a barbarian. I just love that. I love this. Again, it's just this fun extra little bit of flavor and synergy that can actually be extremely beneficial. So I really like it. However, of course, the Crypt Lord Ring is only once per long rest. So if you've used your Create Undead and the summon has died, because you have to keep the ring on, the summon gets dispelled, and you want to swap it out for something else, of course, you're picking up After Death Tiller's part. When the wearer is downed, they rise once more with half of their HP, but are gripped by Shadow Possession, which again, I still wish actually worked. It's meant to be a debuff, but it makes you into a crazy person who attacks anything nearby, but also deals an additional 1d4 necrotic damage. However, Shadow Possession has never worked. Larian has never ever fixed it. You just get up with half your HP for free. No downsides. Which, for our build, is great, but again, that Shadow Possession would have been so cool for this build. Ah, well. But yes, once your Create Undead has served its purpose, and you don't want a long rest yet, swap it out for After Death Tiller's part. And finally, the Ring of Regeneration. So, again, say we burn through all of our slots. We burn through all of our free downs, essentially. The Ring of Regeneration, combined with the Periaptive Wound Closure, means that every time we go down, we get back up guaranteed. The Periaptive Wound Closure would mean that we'll always heal the full maximum of 4 HP every turn, meaning we're actually going to be extremely tanky even before we go down. And then the Ring of Regeneration will revive us from being downed, which again, will be downed every single time, thanks to the Periaptive Wound Closure, which means we just get back up infinitely. Almost making most of the abilities we've gotten up until now kind of irrelevant. But then again, all of these like kind of extra rings here that are kind of cornerstones of the build aren't obtained until late into Act 3. So having those abilities beforehand does still make sense, but basically the parry out plus ring of regeneration combo, it just makes you immortal, which is exactly what this build is about. But again, so maybe at the end of the day, you could do a full respec and play around with other concepts when you don't feel like you need so much of those extra downs once you have these pieces of equipment. But you know what? I don't care. The theming is fun, damn it. And I don't want to rely on just like a single ring to make an entire build work for a whole playthrough, especially when that ring is only obtained in Act 3. So I feel like having the progression into actual immortality over time is pretty damn nice. Now, I don't have these things here actually in front of me because it's a pain in the backside to mod them in, but there are some extra things I recommend you pick up in your playthrough. I will have links to the wiki pages in the description so that you can get your hands on these yourself by doing the relevant quests. The first is the Necromancy of Fae quest. You're definitely going to get your hands on the Necronomicon, effectively, to be able to use Dance Macabre, which is going to give you a ton of extra undead summons that act autonomously but will benefit from the features such as your Circle of Bones resistances and other things like that. A piece of equipment that I did not include in this build was the Abyssal Gloves, which can technically is another way to give resistance to undead allies, but it has the chance of making enemies go mad, which I think the ghouls are immune to. Good lord, I cannot speak today if you couldn't tell. So maybe you kind of want to throw in a bit of a combo with that, but otherwise just pick up the Necromancy of Fae, complete the questline, and get Dance Macabre, allowing you to summon all those little guys. In Act 2, make sure you get your hands on the Conjure Shadow Lantern Wraith by making the Shadow Lantern, which is again another summon that you can use to fill out your little undead army. I would absolutely recommend picking up Shovel as well. While not an undead, him being a little invisible familiar that can run around and cause havoc, and also potentially give you advantage on attacks, is very, very fun. Highly recommend him. And also, make sure you grab the Amulet of Lost Voices. I've not included it in the equipment screen here, but having the ability to speak with the dead when you need to would be very, very fun. And again, not included them in this build here just purely for testing purposes, but the elliptic powers would absolutely give this build an extra bit of edge, especially with the flavor that maybe the thing that brought this corpse back to life was some sort of advanced Mind Flayer tadpole. Could be very fun, would fit right into the story of BG3, so you could go with that. Things like the, the thing that gives you extra, what's it called? Psionic Overload, that's it, giving you extra psychic damage on all your attacks, allowing you to kind of enter an ascended rage state. Could be pretty fun. You've got access to like all sorts of things that just like the black hole, the displacer beast shape. You could become this really creepy sort of thing. So I would actually recommend the Illithid powers on this build. I actually think it would just give you a bit more to do as a mostly pure barbarian. I've done a barbarian playthrough that used the Illithid powers where I was a throwing barbarian, and it was really, really fun. So I know that playstyle works. So feel free to give it a try. So yeah. Definitely recommending Illithid powers, definitely recommend going through a lot of the quests to get you more summons, and yeah, just enjoy playing this sort of character. As for the clothing, we have got the Kevo Fogue outfit and the leather boots from Fear Taylor's Camp Clothing, dyed with the absolute dye from Favouring Colours, all mods available on console. But yeah, that is the build. I suspect the combat footage will have been playing while I was going over the sort of extra stuff there, and you can see this build does get up to some shenanigans despite, basically again, it's a very simple build from the leveling scheme, but taking the equipment into account and just seeing how all the abilities kind of stack up, it's just very, very fun. And even in this combat footage, despite the fact that I could have gotten back up from death like 7 times, possibly even infinitely, never really came up because we're just so goddamn tanky. But in tougher boss fights where you just have to tank the world, you're going to start to feel how valuable it is to be fucking immortal. But yeah, that is the build. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.